caregivered.org or call 561-482-0086. And let's get your mental road to healing started. The opinions expressed on the following sponsored program are strictly those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. Welcome to the Caregiver Reality Show, hosted by gerontologist and family caregiver expert David Levy, speaking on a topic that is not only a national problem, but an international one, and represents one of the biggest dilemmas facing us today: Alzheimer's disease and dementia. With no cure in sight and hundreds more being diagnosed weekly, Alzheimer's is more feared than cancer or heart disease. Join us as David Levy breaks it down and educates, informs, and explains useful caregiver strategies and techniques that 25 years of non-clinical family caregiving have taught him. You can listen or call in and be part of the show. 888-565-1470 to ask your questions. And now, here's David Levy.
Take them tonight. Good evening, Boca Raton, America, and the world. You're watching CaregiverReality.com. You can see us on CaregiverReality.com. Just click on Live Show, and we'll be streaming to you wherever you are. We're also coming to you on WWNN 1470 AM in Boca Raton. And you can call us at 888-565-1470. Tonight, as I promised you last week, I've got a very special guest, Dr. Mark Brody, who is president of Brain Matters in Delray Beach. He's a prominent principal researcher and is finding solutions for dementia of the Alzheimer's type. And he operates one of the finest FDA-approved testing labs for dementia anywhere. He's just returned from the International Alzheimer's Convention in Boston, and we're going to hear what he has to say, and you're hearing it here first. Good evening, Dr. Brody.
Hey, David.
All right. So, you just spent 4 or 5 days in Boston with some of the folks that are making the news or not making the news. What did you find that you were surprised about, and what did you like, what didn't you like?
Okay. Well, I didn't like that we really didn't have anything major to announce this year. We came close, but there was no cigars. There was a number of big studies that fell short. There's some promise in the near future of new studies that show some promise starting, but the Alzheimer's community, the scientists, the researchers, there's been a pall of discouragement and disappointment because we haven't rung the bell. We haven't come up with that first big drug that makes a dent in this disease, but we're getting closer. So the positive things that came from the meeting is that there was some preemptive things that we can do to delay the disease that you may have heard about, that I've written about in my book, for prevention, and that's exercise, things that companies like Pfizer and Merck don't make. There's control of diabetes. There's concentrated mental cognitive training. And as part of that, there are some new out-of-the-box treatments, especially from some firms in Israel, where instead of pills or injections, there's actually a device to stimulate the brain magnetically as you learn to enhance memory, and we're in early phases, but is showing some very, very dramatic and encouraging results.
Well, you were describing a little bit of that to me earlier, and you said it's a chair with an arm that articulates to one side of the brain or the other and uses magnetic pulses.
Right. This is direct magnetic stimulation. In English, it means that you would sit in a chair that looks like a dentist chair, and in front of you would be a screen, and you would be learning new information. And as you do, there'd be an arm that comes from the side of the chair with a magnetic stimulator, and it would go on different parts of the brain depending on what you're trying to learn, and you would get these magnetic pulses. In this particular study, you would get pulses for an hour, and you would learn different cognitive inputs, and as you get the pulses, you would retain that information.
What is it about that magnetic pulse that helps to amplify the learning and retention process?
Okay, I'll give you the Disney version because
That's fine.
the truth is the details of people actually knowing is still not there. But the Disney version is when you learn new information, it comes in and goes to a relay station in the brain called the hippocampus. And then it projects out to different parts of the brain in like a software kind of electric pulse. And as that pulse gets consolidated, as you're consolidating memory, it's sinking into brain and establishing pathways. And those pathways eventually become structural brain, RNA. But if that pathway, if that initial pulse fades too quickly, then the memory doesn't stick. So that's called long-term potentiation. And when you're learning new things, if you amplify the whole signal by giving pulses, that allows that to be reinforced as though you're learning it over and over again without actually having to do it over and over again.
And so it's kind of like amplifying the capability of what rote memory learning would be, the repetition, when you learn your times tables, for argument's sake.
Sophisticated in that these are different kind of paradigms reinforcing what we call brain systems. So this can be motor skills, it can be language, it can be visual, and using this in the healthy population, you could enhance your tennis game, your golf game, your ability to assimilate new information, train drone pilots. The intelligence community is...
Oh, they must be fascinated with this.
Yeah, and they're already way ahead of the curve. But to try to use this for a disease state, for Alzheimer's, looks very promising. The initial results are almost too good to believe. But now we have to prove from small numbers, and the study's been done at Harvard and Cleveland Clinic and Mass General. And so those small numbers look very impressive. And now we're going out to bigger numbers, 130 patients from 7 or 8 patients, all of which got better. But the magnitude of improvement is more than 100% better than our best drugs.
Wow.
Even the best drugs that we're setting a goal for disease modification. So people are going outside the box, and there are new things happening. Everybody and his cousin, small biotechs, startups, medium and major pharmaceutical companies have some drug in the pipeline.
Right. Now, let me ask you a question. I mean, that's absolutely fascinating. So when they were doing this with the 7, 8, at those various centers of excellence, Harvard, Cleveland Clinic, Mass General, were they doing it on healthy patients to see how well they could do better in learning, or were they dealing with people, let's say, with early stage or very, very mild cognitive impairment?
No, they were doing them with mild to moderate Alzheimer's.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, this was specific for the people who have the disease, and so they wanted to see, when you're learning new things, how well can you hang on to that? And if you, for instance, in this study, you got this stimulation an hour a day, 5 days a week for 12 weeks. The question is,
how long will you retain it?
Out to a month, there was about 90% retention.
Wow. Now, knowing that, we had 6 or 7 drugs in the last year kind of go upside down by not meeting the endpoints from the FDA, and we don't need to get into, which specific ones, but all of them, for the most part, I believe, were kind of aimed at beta amyloid. That's kind of been, I'm not saying that there wasn't something trying to deal with, something in the synapses, et cetera. But basically, we've been trying to go after the beta amyloid plaque understanding. Is that still where the greater weight of where the research community is still at? Or is it amyloid, but also, because it seems to me in doing the studies, not the studies, but in the research that I've done, is it looks like we're trying to find it earlier and maybe slow it down or slow down the aging or how quickly the Alzheimer's gene is replicating itself and advancing, so that maybe by the time it does spill out, we've gotten 5 or 10 more years of a better quality of life.
Right.
All right. Is where, in your estimation, because you're a researcher, do you see this coming down? Are you looking to try and stop it earlier, or are you still approaching the beta amyloid dissolution, or
Right.
whatever we want to call it?
So there's the amyloid hypothesis,
Mm-hmm.
and let me give you the Disney version. Amyloid is a protein. We make it, we need it. And just like there's good cholesterol and bad cholesterol, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly amyloid.
Mm-hmm.
And the good and the bad we can recirculate, essentially. The ugly amyloid, we make too much or we can't clear it, and when that builds up, it's toxic to the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And wherever it gets deposited, the brain circuits start to melt away. There's one other culprit that we see in people's brains that are the hallmarks of Alzheimer's, and that's tau protein, TAU, like the Eastern religion tau.
Right.
And that too is toxic to the brain. And we have our first trial that is impacting tau. So that's started. But most of the trials have been geared towards stopping the bad amyloid from forming,
Mm-hmm.
or pulling it out. And that's been 80% of the trials. Then the first trials for tau have started, and amyloid gets deposited where it drops, but tau forms and hops on the axonal highway, and it propagates the disease. So there's a lot of interest in tau.
Mm-hmm. And isn't that something that we've read? We can find that in the cerebral spinal fluid, beta
Right.
amyloid and tau, which can be early biomarkers.
Right. Here's the paradigm shift. In the last 5 years, we're a lot better at making an accurate diagnosis. So in the old days, which was 5 or 6 years ago, the only way to know if somebody had Alzheimer's, absolutely positively for sure,
Mm-hmm.
like Federal Express, was to wait till they passed away and autopsy their brain, or do a biopsy, which most people don't want to go for. So with the advent of these new markers, one is in the spinal fluid where we can measure the amyloid and the tau levels, and the other is with a new type of PET scan. And PET scan stands for positron emission transaxial tomography, and if you say that really fast, nobody gives you anything.
Okay.
But what it means in English is this. When you inject a tracer, or a short-acting radionucleotide, so it's a little tracer, and you can use different kinds of tracers. The latest one is a tracer that goes up into the brain and lights up amyloid like little light bulbs. So you can see the amyloid in the brain, and you can see the tau dripping from the brain, and the amyloid actually goes down in the spinal fluid because it's all stuck up in the brain. So those processes are happening anywhere from 10 to 15 years before anybody gets a symptom. Mm-hmm. That's how powerful the brain is in its ability to modulate it. Right.
Yeah.
So we can pick up and make the diagnosis with about 95% accuracy without doing a biopsy now. Big deal.
All right. Well, I mean, this has been fascinating because, there's, as you said, there was nothing magically new that came out of the International Convention, but yet understanding, which is something that I've been trying to bring to our audience, that this happens so much earlier than before we actually see it, that it's going to be, I think, from not stopping it, not curing it necessarily, but preventing it for a longer quality of life in an aging world, is going to be from some of the things that you just discussed, and I appreciate you putting it in the Disney World version. We're going to take a moment for a break. This is caregiverreality.com. You can see us live on the internet. You can call in and ask a question of Dr. Brody, 888-565-1470, and we'll go to a break now.
Hello, are you a family caregiver? Are you taking care of a spouse, parent, or loved one who can no longer care for themselves? Are you dealing with Alzheimer's disease and don't know what to do? Are you stressed, burned out, frustrated, and don't know where to turn? Have you realized that your doctor, lawyer, and mental health professionals don't have real practical answers? You need a non-clinical family caregiver expert that the professionals turn to. You need David Levy. He is a family caregiver expert with 25 years of active experience with thousands of family caregivers. He can help you provide a better quality of life for you and your loved one. Contact David Levy at dlevy@caregivered.org. That's dlevy@caregivered.org. Or call 561-482-0086. And let's get your mental road to healing started.
We're back with Dr. Brody. We're on caregiverreality.com. You can call in at 888-565-1470. And Dr. Brody, you were just explaining during the break that there's a new study starting that's dealing with the adult children of, I assume, Alzheimer's victims, to try and do what? So that our audience can appreciate it, because if it's a new study starting, it may be of interest to people that have family pattern of the disease, and something that they might be able to do to either explore whether they have it or whether that leads them into a better study to deal with the issue earlier and earlier. What is the program?
So the Holy Grail has been, if these bad proteins, toxic proteins, are forming anywhere from 10 to 15 years before somebody gets a symptom, could we identify the people who are going to get the disease and they don't have any symptoms, and we could treat them with some of these drugs that show real potential, earlier the better, and we would treat them and they would never know what they missed. So what this is predicated on is, if you have a direct family member who has Alzheimer's, you have about a 40% increased risk, and if they have a particular gene, it can be higher.
That's the ApoE and some of the others that we hear about.
And there's
SPON1.
There's a number of genes now, but ApoE is also a gene that controls fat metabolism, carries cholesterol, and it's involved in expression of making amyloid. So the idea would be that this is why it's such a breakthrough study. It hasn't started quite yet, because we're trying to go to the FDA and say, if these people, and we've targeted adult children because they've seen the beast, they've lived with it, and they're willing to take some risk that most people wouldn't, is if we could say there's amyloid in your brain with this PET scan, and we can see that you're dripping the spinal fluid showing you're dripping these abnormal proteins, and you have the genes, then we would say, let's treat you with some of these new drugs because we're really early, and hopefully you will never get the disease. Now here's the problem. We can't be sure that the people that we're identifying as high risk are going to get the disease for sure. And two is, we're going to treat them with an investigative drug that we don't know works for sure and has side effects. So it's taken a long time to negotiate with the FDA to go ahead, but it's going to happen. And it's very exciting for us. And then when we have time, if you ask me about what's going on in the country of Colombia, where they have people
5,000 family members
that are autosomal dominant, and they're destined to get this disease in their 30s, and they're dead by their 50s. And there's a big project going on there.
Yes, I know. I've been aware of that for a while. Now, let me ask you this. One of the things you and I have talked about, and I mention on the show all the time, is we don't have enough volunteers and folks that are willing to come in and say, hey, I'd like to be a part of, one of these drug and investigative trials. And as you so accurately point out, we're never going to get to a cure if we don't have people that, and I'm not viewing them as lab rats, because I know you go through an extensive evaluation before you put anybody in the trial, and, you'll pull them out if there's any, negative side effects. Tell me what you think, without naming, the drug, which you may not be able to. Do you have a couple of new programs that are getting underway for folks that may not have had, a positive or an experience that they could continue on with because they didn't meet the FDA third round of human study?
So when you do clinical research with people, it's under the umbrella and auspices of the FDA. You have to first prove that it works that it's safe. Right? That's phase 1. And you try that in normal people and then people with the disease. You find the dose, is it safe? Then you go to phase 2. And after phase 1, you go to the FDA and say, can we go the next step? Then you go, is it still safe, and is it doing anything? Is there a hint it's doing something?
Right.
And if that's the case, then you go to phase 3. And those are bigger studies. And once you get a couple studies, 2 big phase 3, then you can go to the FDA, to the table, and say, I want my drug approved, and they're going to sell it in Walgreens and CVS, and I've hit the jackpot.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is, to get in these studies, and we do phase 2 and phase 3 trials, there's already been a lot of information and data analyzed that says it's safe and that it's doing something, or the FDA wouldn't let us get to that point.
Right.
Doing nothing is not an option with this disease. Everybody gets worse, everybody dies, everybody succumbs, they lose their independence. There is no dignity in this disease. And so if you come in a trial, you get at least a 50% chance at a breakthrough drug. And if you don't come in a trial, you have a 100% chance of not getting a breakthrough drug. It's really that simple.
Well, that's pretty impressive. Now, if somebody wanted to contact you to see if their loved one was eligible for a trial, how do they reach you? I mean, I know you're on Atlantic Avenue in Del Rey, and it's Brain Matters, but give us a telephone number and tell us, if you would, in just a few words, what's the first step in evaluating a potential client to be in a drug study? So maybe we take a little of the mystery out of it.
So we're Brain Matters Research, and our number's 561-374-8461, and we're here in Del Rey. Or you can go on the web at brainmattersresearch.com. So we do no-cost evaluations. So you come in and we can tell you, do you have anything to worry about? Is this normal brain aging? Is there something else going on? Do you need a workup? Do you already have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's from an outside physician or another neurologist? And what are the options open to you? In general terms, you have to have somebody who can come with you to be in a study. By virtue of the fact that you have some problems with your memory, we need somebody who can corroborate that you're taking the medicine or you're having a side effect, and the FDA requires that.
All right, so that's a family caregiver for the most part.
Right, and you have to be relatively healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And that means you can't have had an active cancer in the last few years, and that if you have heart disease or kidney disease or whatever it may be, diabetes, that it's stable.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing I want you to know is the drugs that we have out there, and there's only 4. There's the Aricept, the Exelon, the pill and the patch, the Razodine, and the Menda. If you're on those medicines, you stay on them. You don't go off them. But in addition to the ones you're on, then you get a chance at hopefully a breakthrough medicine.
All right. And when they come to you, they get what? A physical evaluation as well as a psychometric or a psychological evaluation? What are the early steps, if somebody wanted to bring a client to you or bring a loved one to you?
If you were to come and we were to do a no-cost screening, it would take 15 or 20 minutes to get a rough idea where you're at and your basic medical history. So we wouldn't be doing extensive exams physically, but we would really hone in on what are your memory and cognitive capabilities and what is your medical history. Because sometimes things that look like dementia/Alzheimer's, which is the most common type of dementia, are not. And they're simple things, and they're reversible things, and they're fixable things. So the first thing is, let's not miss anything that's fixable, and let's make an accurate diagnosis as best we can, and we can make it very accurately now. And then let's talk about research.
Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. Now, I know some of the things that came out of the international convention that you just attended were, if people stayed working and didn't retire so early, that it would what? It would help to continue to stimulate their brain. It would keep them busy. It would allow them to socialize. Was that the net
Which was
effect?
very disconcerting because I'm so tired I want to retire. Then I thought, okay, I'm going to retire and I'm going to get Alzheimer's.
Okay.
But let me tell you, in simple terms, there's something called a default mechanism, which means when you're focused on a task, you recruit different parts of the brain. But when you're not, you go back to a default, a resting state. And in that resting state, where you're not really focused, it turns out that you burn up more energy. But when you're focused, things become much more efficient in the brain. So it's better to be engaged.
So it's not quite a use it or lose it, but it's a stimulating effect of continuing on. Now, we've all heard that if you undertake a new task, you decide that you're going to learn a new language, or that you're going to take up music, or whatever it may be, something that you're not accustomed to doing.
Right.
Is that still a good stimulator? Is that still, in your estimation? I've read your book a number of times, and I know that healthy lifestyle, as you said, exercise, nutrition, keeping yourself busy, socializing, doing the stuff that one would hope everybody would do, and trying to deal with obesity as well as, if you have diabetes or other inflammatory disease. Is that still, for the moment, your mantra? Short of having something new on the clinical horizon?
Right. So learning something new creates new synaptic connections and reinforces ones that are there. So you're strengthening those connections. And as it turns out, it doesn't matter if you learn Spanish or Chinese, but the process that you're going through is very important. And then the second part of that is, you don't do Sudoku because somebody told you it's good for your brain. You do something that you're motivated to do, because you have to have a level of motivation and interest to actually fire those circuits up.
That's fascinating. All right, because I know everybody, that's doing their crossword puzzle or their Sudoku or their jumble, is motivated to do it, and obviously it has a beneficial effect. I want you, if you would please, to give us your phone number again, because it's so important out there to the audience that's listening that we have people that volunteer, that are willing to be part of the program. It doesn't cost you anything to become part of the program. You're going to get some of the best care available and the latest and greatest innovations. Are you going to be, hopefully, one of these days getting that chair?
Yeah, I hope so.
Okay. Well, this has been fascinating, Dr. Berti. Please mention your phone number again.
It's Brain Matters Research in Delray, and it's 561-374-8461, or go on the web. It's brainmattersresearch.com.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here and bringing us the news of what the latest things that came out of the International Convention. And this is WWNN 1470 AM. I'm David Levy, your host. Thank you for joining us. I will see you next Monday at 6:30 with a lot of new and exciting stuff. Thank you again, Dr. Brody.
Thanks for having me.
You have been listening and watching David Levy, gerontologist and non-clinical family caregiving expert. Visit our website at caregiverreality.com and hear and see unscripted family caregiver support groups discussing all of the questions that you have wanted to ask but didn't know where to turn. Tune in again next time for more updates and special guests who bring their caregiving experience to you so that you can deal with your problems and hear how family caregiving is affecting fellow Americans just like you. The opinions expressed on the preceding